Okay, welcome to the 11 o'clock session of Faculty Forum. Right after this session will be lunch, so we're going to end right at 11:45, so you can get settled into lunch before the speaker starts at noon. Right now, our session is Spend Less Time Grading and More Time Teaching with Perceptive, and we have Andy Bauma and Jeremy Rose from the Department of Integrative Biology. Thank you.
So before I get started, I just want to say that to use the Perceptive system, it's not required that you wear a blue patterned shirt. This was a coincidental choice that Andy and I made earlier today, so not required. Anyway, we're going to talk to you a bit about this Perceptive system that we use for peer-reviewed assignments in a variety of our back core courses in integrative biology. It's been proven to be a really powerful tool for our students in terms of helping cement their knowledge base and helping inform their scientific communication skills as well. So we want to share that message with you folks. But just to take it back a step, we can talk first of all about what is peer review. And peer review is really a shift towards that sense of student-centered instruction. What it does is it emphasizes active engagement, where students are working actively to pull in their own knowledge and to cohesively bring that knowledge together throughout their learning process. And some of the outcomes that have been measured by that is a demonstrated increase in exam scores. So we do see that when essays do transition from a traditional model where it's instructor graded over towards a peer-reviewed system, students can perform better on exams. And it also has been demonstrated to have lower rates of DFWs for course enrollment as well. Central concept for peer review is that it's the students that are providing the feedback, not the instructors that are providing the feedback. But a very important piece of that is that it is facilitated by the instructors. So instructors are involved in that process, but they're empowering the students to help each other provide feedback in a meaningful and useful way. And an outcome of that is that students can learn the materials better, and they tend to retain those materials over a longer period of time, and they develop confidence as writers. And Andy has done some great work into looking into the pedagogical literature that has demonstrated this in real classrooms as well. And part of the highlights is that it really highlights the process of that information dissemination in sciences. Peer review is a fundamental process to how science is communicated in terms of publications of primary literature, et cetera. So it's one way that we can expose students to how the process of science is actually occurring in the professional world around them. Benefits of peer review in undergrad courses focus in three key areas. First of all, there's strong benefits for the writer, the author of the work itself. This enhances the opportunity for multiple assignments that can help develop communication skills. So by shifting some of that feedback responsibilities to students, it opens up opportunities for more opportunities for these students to engage in a communication process. It does provide them non-specialist feedback from multiple peers working on the same assignment, so it gives them a chance to bring together a variety of perspectives and not just hear from one individual, but instead try to get a better sense of the holistic way to respond to folks who are taking a look at their written work. And students do tend to write more effectively for their peers than they do for, say, a TA or an instructor. And that's particularly true at the draft stage of an assignment. For drafts, they tend to feel it's a little bit more of a one-on-one with an instructor or a TA, but oh my gosh, now my peers are going to be looking at this work. I better put some harder effort into this rough draft process, right? There's definite gains for the reviewers as well. It turns out that reviewing can be a very valuable metacognitive task. It helps the reviewer improve their own writing skills and their learning of the subject matter. And there's really three ways in which this can occur. First of all, they learn to recognize mistakes in others' work and can therefore apply that to their own approaches in their writing as well. Second, they can monitor their own level of understanding by looking at their peers' work as well. So if another peer is, say, outperforming on their written material, it helps them understand where they need to raise the bar. It can also really reinforce when a student is exhibiting strong writing skills, when they see perhaps some work of their peers that may not be up to that same bar. They can help bring their students and elevate other students up as well. And then it also builds their communication confidence. So not only are they communicating based on the course content, but they're now working on communicating with their peers and building that sense of community. So for those of you who are in the room, the same room for the last talk, one of the things that was mentioned was getting that sense of community, that sense of collaboration, and that role as a reviewer can really help tie together that community. What we have found in using this peer review types of assignments in our work is that students have often self-reported that some of the ways that they receive the greatest benefit in these writing assignments does come from this reviewer component. Faculty also make significant gains. This can be in the form of scalability. So you can create more creative and engaging assignments, and this allows it to scale with class size as you work in perhaps more peer reviewers or break it up into groups. It's more efficient, so as instructors, we can spend less time focusing on grading individual submissions and more time on taking a look at how the class overall is performing on these. So this leads to assessment. We can identify skill deficits and areas of misunderstanding both at the larger class level through some of the analytics that are available, and then at the individual levels as well to help identify those who may be struggling. What it leads to is really we spend less time focusing on the grading component and more time focusing on the teaching component to reach our students. So what is Peerceptive? Peerceptive is a peer engagement and collaboration platform. It's a separate website at peerceptive.com. It's based on a wealth of research that has looked at both the reliability of the metrics they use for the grading and for the peer review process and the validity of that process. And it started out of University of Pittsburgh's Learning Research and Development Center. They were part of University of Pittsburgh for about 10 years and has since spun this off as a separate project. But it did start in the academic realm. And they can take a variety of assignment types, whether it be a group writing assignment, video uploads, presentations, group projects. They have an opportunity to use it in multiple ways. A big benefit of Peerceptive is the instructor analytics that they provide. There's just a whole wealth of information that we can get in terms of quantitative measures, from the distribution of any particular rubric question on how students are answering that and applying it across the class. We can look at individual reviewers, individual authors, etc. But they provide a really strong base of instructor analytics. It helps us assess progress towards learning objectives, whether it be for that particular assignment, for the course overall, or even departmental objectives. We can identify students that are in need of early intervention in the process. We can address student concerns about the peer review process. So for those of you who've done peer review in your classrooms before, one complaint that you may hear is, why is this non-expert providing feedback on my assignment? And what we can do is go through the analytics and show, look, their reviews tend to line up and tend to coalesce together toward what ultimately is your score. And it also gives us an opportunity to look at that critically, and if students do have real concerns, we can drill down on that individual and say they did have an unfair reviewer. We can easily pluck that out and remove it from consideration in their grade through these analytical tools. And then it helps us really hone in our rubrics that we use over time because we have this great analytical power. How the process works is it's really a 3-stage process for the students and then an added 4th stage for the instructor. First, the students write their paper, and we generally lay out this process over about a 2-week period for the students. We give them a week to look at the assignment, pull the assignment together, and upload their submissions. The second step of that process then is the peer review phase, and that is where peers then are assigned to look at each other's work. And we give them maybe half a week or so for that process. And then a 3rd stage that comes in is a back evaluation. In this stage, the author has an opportunity to look at the peer reviews and comment on the helpfulness of those peer reviews toward understanding, meeting the learning objectives of the assignment. And then the final stage on the instructor side is generating the grades and transferring those grades into Canvas or whatever you use to manage your grade systems. An important part of this is that Peerceptive runs it in a double-blind process. So as users sign up, they can choose a pseudonym, and everything occurs behind the pseudonyms. So that can help eliminate some of the potential for bias in the classrooms that may be based on individually defining characteristics. So general workflow, this is what the students would see when they first enter an assignment. You can see that they get an overview, there's a link for the rubric, and then there's details that are some of the settings of the assignment itself. But generally the first thing they see are due dates for the 3 phases, whether it's the text submission, the peer review, and the back evaluation, and then a variety of buttons on the right-hand side that take them to each stage of that project. The assignment description's quite straightforward. It's no different than what you would do for a traditional classroom or any other online report. You could write up your instructions in a Google document and include a link here in the assignment description. You can put the full description in Peerceptive. You can have hyperlinks. You can also select an option for multiple drafts if you want this to be a project students revise and submit again for another process of peer review, etc. And then one thing that we've done in terms of academic integrity is we have the students also submit via Canvas to turn it in so that we can compare for academic integrity and make sure that everything is above board in that sense. When it comes down to conducting the peer reviews, what you see on the right-hand side here, and I realize it's not very, lots of folks in the back may not be able to make out the details on that, but this is one rubric question with the text of the question listed underneath the bullet point there in that paragraph, and then you see a series of 7 choices that the student can use to rate the essay that would have opened up into another window on the side. These rubric questions are really quite easy to create, and eCampus is available to help implement those into Peerceptive if you need some help with that technical side. You have a range of options from 1 to 7. You don't have to enter 7 different categories for any particular rubric item. You can do a subset of that. You can have just a 2-choice, or you can have as many as 7 for any rubric question. And then you can have a series of questions. We may have questions that are related to an essay in terms of the mechanics. Do they use good topic sentences? Do they have a central thesis? Are there any typos, etc.? And then we may have a rubric that's based more on the content that goes along with the mechanics, for example. There are other options included as well where they could apply the rubric to their own work. That adds another level of that sort of metacognitive component. You can make the rubric available during the writing process so that it can help guide their writing. Or if your rubric is very specific, you can hide it during that process so that you're not essentially giving away the answers, right? You can also add the number of reviewers per draft. We found from our experience 4 tends to be a pretty solid number in terms of kind of evening out any potential bias for one reviewer over another. And then you can auto or manually assign reviewers as well. So there's quite a bit of flexibility in how you want to implement that process. Then this final stage for the students is back evaluating the peer reviewers. So I've got another example here where a reviewer has entered a comment that generally describes how the student did on the essay. Comments are a part of the peer review system. And then the student has responded and said, "Thank you so much. I found this format, or I found these formatting tips helpful. I never would have caught the errors otherwise." And it allows that author to go back and say, "Thank you, yes, this was a great review, and it was worthy of 5. It was really helpful." Now, if a peer reviewer doesn't provide any comments, the reviews seem really far off, they can then go back and say, "Geez, I really would have liked to have learned more information from this particular peer reviewer." And what it does is it reinforces the students going back and actually looking at their work and seeing how people have responded to their work. So it, again, gets to that metacognitive reinforcement by the author. Back evaluation is not a required step. If you want to keep it just at the peer review level, you can keep it that way, and that can help streamline it throughout the course. And then eCampus is also available to help if you're doing a group project in terms of implementing a team member evaluation as part of this peer review process. So another way in which you can engage in that sort of metacognitive development of team. The grades generally break down into 3 categories, and that would be the second row that you see here. And you can adjust the weighting in any one of those categories. So the 3 categories are the document itself, that's the writing component by the author. The second is an actual peer review component to the score. And then third is how well they're keeping up with getting the tasks done on time. And you can adjust those various percentages. Some of our assignments, we make it 50% based on the writing, 30% based on peer review to keep them engaged in that process, and then another 20 for simply going through the steps in a timely fashion. What you see across the top, I will get there. So what you see across the top, though, is a further breakdown of those grading components. You can see that for the review section, for example, it's both the reviewer grade and the reviewer grade is comprised of the accuracy grade. So how well an individual's peer reviews align with the other peer reviewers among the documents they looked at. And then also that helpfulness grade. So how well they provided feedback to the original author. The writing grade is based on peer reviews of your written work. And then the task grade again is there. Another way you can affect the scoring is within the rubric itself. Say some rubric questions are really important. You can weight those highly, where other rubric questions may not be points of emphasis, but are still things that you want the author to know about. You can rate those a little bit lower so that they're not as influential on the overall final grade. You'll see that there's 22% out of 20 in the task component, and this rewards students who want to do more peer reviews and engage further in that process. It's another option you can select to provide them a little extra carrot for collaborating even further. There's 3 different degrees of instructor involvement in the grading process. One way in which instructors can perform grading is through benchmarking. And this process works after the review stage, in which Peerceptive has identified the 5 lowest scores based on peer review and the 5 highest scores based on peer review. As an instructor, you can go back in then and ground truth what you would score those top 5, those low 5, and then it will go ahead and distribute scores between those tops and bottoms components based on what you've determined are the high and low levels. Another option is a curved grading scheme where you can set the mean and the standard deviation of grades for a particular assignment, say 85% with a 10 either way. Then it will go ahead and distribute scores across that curvature method. There's also an option to include instructor ratings and overwrite all student ratings with an instructor rating if you want to get that involved in the grading process. So it's a highly flexible process. So that kind of runs you through how the workflow is. And again, we spaced this out over about 2 weeks. And now Andy's going to take you into a little bit more detail about how he's used it.
You go back. Oop. Okay, and so one thing I want to point out about the bonus reviews that's it's really nice about this system is that if you've done peer review in classes before, you know that the Achilles heel is the group of students that drop the ball and don't follow through and don't do their peer reviews, so somebody doesn't get enough reviews on their paper. And the really clever thing about Peerceptive is that by giving students an extra credit of whatever you want to set it to for extra reviews, it always, without fail, fills in the gap of reviews that were not conducted. So that is a brilliant step that Peerceptive has. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just take you through an example of how I've used Peerceptive and how Jeremy has used Peerceptive in a particular course, and then how my use of the program led to a research question that I then addressed with an eCampus Fellows study just recently. Sorry? Yeah. Here we go. Okay, so this is the way that I first piloted this program was with a BAT Core course that Jeremy and I both teach. I teach it on campus and as an eCampus course. And it's in the synthesis category of the BAT Core. And so there's a requirement for a term paper, a 1,250 word term paper. And I've had anywhere between 60 and 130 students in that class. And so you can imagine having a term paper to grade is a very big obstacle. And so I've been doing peer review in other classes in a different institution for quite a while using a different program. But I became interested in this new program, Peerceptive, which is very much Web 2.0, very well supported and works very well. And I decided to try to pilot it with this BAT Core course that I had this issue with, finding a way to provide students feedback on this term paper when I just had too many students to do it in a timely way along the way. So the way that I use it, I designed, so the overall assignment, the term paper, is they write they write about an ecoregion. So it's a conservation biology class. And an ecoregion is a conservation unit on a landscape scale. So it's a a region that has been identified as having certain conservation priorities. And so they write about this ecoregion, and then they also write about an endangered or threatened animal or plant that lives within this ecoregion. And then they also then write an argument for certain conservation actions for this species within this ecoregion. So that's the assignment. That's the term paper assignment. And one thing that, again, those of you who've done peer review before will probably recognize is that peer review tends to work the best on shorter assignments. And having a term paper be peer reviewed is difficult because it takes a long time to do multiple reviews for students. And so what I did is I split it up into 3 parts and assigned those 3 parts at different points of the quarter. And so I actually have 4 different perceptive assignments. The first one is kind of a practice assignment. It's a very simple assignment, so they learn how the system works. So that would really be perceptive 1. But the first assignment associated with the term paper project is a 5-paragraph essay that I have them write that characterizes the ecoregion. So it is an introduction, a conclusion, 3 body paragraphs, has an expository thesis that characterizes the ecoregion. This is what lives there, what geological characteristics it has, and so on. And so that's the first perceptive assignment. And that's a 2-week assignment where they have a week to write it, and then they have a week to peer review and do back evaluations. So that's the first 2 weeks of the class. Actually, first 2 weeks of the class is the test assignment. Weeks 3 and 4 are this assignment. Then assignment 2, they have another 5-paragraph essay where they write a profile of an endangered or threatened species that lives within the ecoregion they already described. Okay, and they go through the same process again, an introduction and a conclusion, 3 body paragraphs, and an expository thesis about this particular species. And then the last part, the last perceptive assignment, is another 5-paragraph essay where they present a case for particular conservation actions for this particular species. Okay, same format. Okay, except this time they use an argumentative thesis where they're arguing for a particular action for this species. So these are the 3 perceptive assignments, and as they go along the way, they use rubrics that I've created to evaluate their peers. And so what they're able to get as they go through the quarter is they're able to get feedback indirectly from me by using my rubrics. And I tell them that a combination of these rubrics is going to be what I use to evaluate their final paper. Okay? So they get practice using the same rubrics that I'm going to use to grade their final paper. Okay? Then the other thing they get is they get feedback from their peers. And as Jeremy talked about, they also get the metacognitive benefit of seeing what they got right, what they got wrong as they look in comparison to their peers as they go throughout the quarter. Okay, so that's a way that they get timely feedback along the way. And because without this system, I can't give them a lot of feedback throughout the quarter because there's too many of them. They're still encouraged to come to office hours and have me look at their thesis statement or provide some feedback on references and the normal kinds of things. But I just don't have enough time to read everybody's essay along the way. Okay, so this is a way for them to get useful feedback, and it's also a way for them to scaffold this project throughout the quarter, so they don't put it all off until Thanksgiving break, which is what they would do normally. And then the final assignment is, now I've reduced the class to between 60 and 70 students. Okay, so it's a little bit more manageable. And they then revise the 3 parts, the 3 perceptive assignments into a term paper. They pull out their introductions of the individual 5-paragraph essays, and they write an overall introduction, an overall conclusion, and they use their argumentative thesis statement for their overall introduction, arguing for a particular conservation actions for a plant or animal species. Okay, and so then that's the term paper, and then I grade that directly using a combination of rubrics that they've used throughout the course. Okay, And that's been, I found that to be very effective at helping reduce the student stress and increase the quality of the writing product. And so I did this first actually I did it at the same time in my online and my on-campus class when I was piloting Peerceptive. And I survey my students at the end of the quarter about their impressions of the course. And it was my impression that while I had lots of positive response, but as you know, students always have things they like to quibble about. And my perception was the online students were a little bit more skeptical of the system. And so I got about to thinking about what reasons there might be for that. And so that led to me asking a research question, and that led to me participating in the eCampus Fellows research program, which I just did over the past year. And my question was, or my perception was that perhaps the 3 times a week or 2 times a week check-in with the students where I explained how the peer review works, the benefits for them as they go through the quarter, my daily check-in explaining how the system worked, explaining what they could do if they thought there was a scoring error, things like that, that because I was able to do that more often with my on-campus students, that perhaps they were more accepting of the program because of that, whereas it's a little bit harder to connect like that with your online students, okay? So my question then was, would greater explanation of the pedagogy and the benefits of peer review and the Peerceptive scoring system, how it works, the safeguards for fairness, would that increase the acceptance by online students of the program? So that was the question I asked. And so I did this over summer and fall in 2 sections of online Z349 biodiversity. And I split, and so the students volunteered for the study. They were given some extra credit towards their course grade if they participated in the study. And I split them up into 2 groups. So I had Group A, which observed videos that I created that I tried to recreate the justification that I use in class for using the system, okay? And so my students in class, I explained the pedagogical benefit, the pedagogy behind peer review, the learner-centered benefits of doing peer review, the benefit of them getting feedback in different formats throughout the quarter. And so I tried to recreate that in a video where I explain research behind doing peer review, show data that show that peer review is effective and whatnot. And then also a video that went in detail through how the scoring works and how they can appeal their score if they're not happy with their score, explaining that. And also talking about how peer review and Peerceptive is similar to the peer review process in science. So I had those videos that Group A observed. And then I had Group B, which is my control group, where they watched just placebo videos that were about course content. They were additional videos about course content that didn't mention Peerceptive. And they saw those throughout the quarter as they were participating in the same assignments, okay? And then both groups took a survey at the end of the course in which they reported their impressions and they made comments about the system. And so I'm going to just briefly here share the instrument that I used. It's a little hard to read, so I'm just going to read it for you. So these are all 11 questions, basically asking them about their perceptions of the effectiveness of the system. Okay. So question 1, so please indicate the degree to which you agree with the following statements. Strongly agree is a 6, strongly disagree is a 1. Okay. And so question 1, Peerceptive assignments helped me to think critically about the subject. Question 2, Peerceptive assignments were challenging. 3, Peerceptive assignments helped me to produce a better final paper. 4, grading rubrics in Peerceptive assignments provided me with useful feedback feedback that I could use to revise my paper. 5, peer comments and peerceptive assignments provided me with useful feedback that I could use to revise my paper. 6, peerceptive assignments helped me learn more about the assignment topic. 7, peerceptive assignments helped me improve writing. 8, reviewing the work of my peers helped my own learning. 9, after the first practice assignment, the peerceptive program was easy. 10, peerceptive assignment grades were fair. 11, the overall approach of this course to meet the back core synthesis requirement of a 1,250-word paper was effective. So these were my questions. Yeah, strongly agree, somewhat agree, 6 through 4, and then 3 through 2 was somewhat agree, disagree, and strongly disagree. And what was unfortunate for my study, okay, was that everybody showed very high acceptance of the program. Everybody, the median was identical between both groups. It was agree. They were very positive about the experience. And so it might have been that my impressions from that first trial run with the system, perhaps maybe I made the assignments better, or perhaps it was just a little bit of a different sort of group of students. I'm not sure. But this is another way to show it. And so here I've lumped the agrees, okay, the strongly agree, and somewhat agree in blue, and the disagrees, strongly disagree, strongly disagree in red. And this is overall, okay. I felt really good about question 11. They all, 100% of them thought it was an effective way to deliver the back core term paper assignment. And there was generally very little pushback to the system. So it didn't, my research question, I didn't really answer my research question. Perhaps if I would have had more skepticism in the group of students, maybe the videos would have helped quell that. But I didn't have a ton of sample that could help me answer. But nevertheless, I felt pretty good about the results. So we designed this to have about 15 minutes of time for questions. We thought there'd probably be a lot of questions. And so with that, I'm going to switch here to this slide, which shows if you're interested in using or trying to use this program in your campus course, you can contact campus via this email, and there's a number of supports for people that want to try it out, as I think Jeremy alluded to as well. They can help you with rubric development, help you with integration, things like that. So that will open it for questions. Jeremy, why don't you come up here too? And so I think the first hand up was you over there. That is a very good question. Okay. The question was, for those of you that couldn't hear, is there a per student fee for use of the program? One of the things that we love about this program is that it's extremely flexible, okay? And so you can go all the way from having students pay for a seat in your course, okay? There's in computer science, there's a professor who's having their students pay, it's like $7 or something, I think, and they can, like buying a textbook, they purchase the seat in their Peerceptive course. You can have your department pay for a block of seats, which is discounted a little bit, and then you can provide those seats for the students to register. You can give them the course code, they register, and there's a certain number of seats allotted to your account. You can do it that way. eCampus can buy a really big block for a whole bunch of courses. That's what they've been doing so far. And then the other way to do it is the university can buy a license. And then it's, that we pay some license fee per year, and then departments and eCampus and students don't need to worry about individual costs per course. So yeah.
And the licensing for the individual student is for a course for a term.
Right.
It's not like Top Hat where it's a
Right.
2-year-long license and
No.
can be used for any number of courses. It's on a per course per term basis.
No, that's only that one computer science class. eCampus is funding it for all of our classes.
So
And
right
for-
now, we use it in, I think, 6 different courses. And for all the eCampus delivery of those courses, eCampus is covering the cost for this.
Okay, I think we had other hands over here. Yes, you in the pink. Yes. Oh, yes. I did try to use that peer review system in Canvas, and I said that I have quite a few years of experience using a different system that had a lot of features similar to Peerceptive, and so I maybe wasn't a good tester of the Canvas system. I found that the Canvas system was really clunky and didn't seem to do a good job at always doing what it was supposed to do. And I tried it one quarter and I decided that it just didn't work for me. So I did try it, yeah.
We had used another system prior to this called Calibrated Peer Review that was put together by UCLA. And that project is not continually as well funded as Peerceptive has been. And so one of the huge values that we see as instructors, and our students have also reported, is that Peerceptive is really responsive to any requests for service. It's been one of the easier systems for us to work with among the variety that we use in eCampus to get quick, proactive service responses.
Yeah, it's like Canvas support. You can give them an email, they contact, and they always get back within a day.
Yeah.
They're really fast. I think that you in the blue had the. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering what you thought I sort of absent of review, say, like, write 4 things you're
Mm-hmm.
I found this. I love the.
Yep. Anonymity, yeah.
The anonymous
Yeah.
ability to do that, because I feel like they all think they're big of a group. You know, nobody says it.
Yeah, I mean,
And they all think they're the only people.
right.
So it's self-isolating. I realize that's different.
Well,
Curious what you thought.
computer science is trying to use it, have people evaluate computer code. It's very flexible. And so Jeremy mentioned that you can upload videos. You can have videos be reviewed. You have students ready to have a video of themselves talking about some of those issues. If it was written, you could very well adapt it for that. The scoring itself is very flexible. So you can give them a completion score, or you could
Or
easily make
provided
it.
2 ideas
Yeah,
for
yeah,
helping handle the
yeah.
problem.
You could definitely use it like that.
You could have a rubric that's also very comment heavy.
Yeah.
So that would generate a little bit more of that sense of discussion back and forth, as opposed to the way we've implemented it, where we do have a series of 10 to 12 questions for each assignment that is then used to determine kind of a grade for that particular assessment.
Well, so what I have found is that these kinds of systems where there's a learning curve, like these are two-step assignments, sometimes 3 if you do back evaluations, right? And so we have this practice assignment that is in the first 2 weeks, and it's not really practice. It's worth 10 points. It's worth real points, but it's worth less than the other ones, right? It's a lower stakes walkthrough of how it works. And it takes them long enough to learn how to use it, that it makes sense to use it multiple times then. If you're spending 2 weeks having them learn how to use a system, it makes sense using it every week. I don't think it's too much work. I mean, we've made decisions about maybe not having as much other kind of stuff because they're doing this peer review. They 1 week they submit they do a writing assignment. The next week they have to do 4 reviews. So we try to make decisions about assignments based on how much time that, the average amount of time that takes. But yeah, that's a good question. Some students think it is too much, but they often will say the same thing about writing in general, so.
I think that one of the issues that we have struggled with a bit is the huge variety in scheduling among our eCampus clientele. And so trying to put it into a 1-week assignment where you would have an opportunity to have them write in the first 3 or 4 days and then do peer
it's not
reviews in the next 3 or
flexible
4 days, really challenging for students who already have some pretty dramatic other things going on in their worlds.
So if we figure if they have a 1-week window for this, a 1-week window for that, that's sufficiently flexible, and that generally works. I'm not sure who was next. You in the back there? You, yes. No, you can have as many open as once, at once, yeah. Yep. Good. So the question was, can you have multiple assignments open at once to provide more flexibility? You can, however, getting students to remember which is the one they're supposed to, that's due this, it helps to keep it as simple as possible, I've found. So I've shied away from having overlap.
I
But
have
you
had
could
some
do that.
success with that in one of, the first time I developed one of these projects, there was a bit of a mismatch in my expectations and what they were responding with, so I did extend the peer review window, and it overlapped with the next project ongoing, and it worked out fairly well. Students were able to keep the two separated. Right there.
Black.
Yes.
Definitely not. We have to be,
Conflicting reading.
yeah, we have to be actively involved. It's not like you hit start and it just goes by itself. Yeah, so one of the analytics that Jeremy talked about was that at the end of an assignment, you get a report showing if there's conflicting ratings. So if some of the rating prompts were less reliable, so you have 4 reviewers, 5 reviewers, if there's a wide disparity, some reviewers thought it was perfect, others thought it was bad, it flags those. And so we go and look at those to see if there's a problem with the ratings, whether there was somebody who was really throwing that particular student's score off. There's the scores are weighted, and so it weighted for accuracy. So there's a lot of stuff going on there to reduce the impact of somebody who wasn't doing a great job in scoring, but it's still something we look at. And so if students also have the right to appeal their score, and we encourage them to do that, I explain it as, it's like, consider it like peer review. I'm the editor of the journal. I'm in charge of what the final outcome is. And so if you have an issue with something that you received in your score, then just send me an email explaining why, and I look at it. And so we're always going in looking at the work as we go. So we're not grading every assignment, but we have to be very much involved. I think the next question was over here. Yeah, although it's a little bit more complex than that. So each of there's a scoring prompt, right, from 1 to 7, and there maybe will be 10 for a particular assignment, or maybe as few as 5, okay? And so each paper, the program then, for each paper, ranks all of the students in the class in terms of the top score for that prompt for a particular student. So there's a ranking. And then for each reviewer who ranks a subset of papers, it compares how their ranking matches up with the overall ranking of the class, of the entire class. Well, but they don't always all review the same paper, right? So it's a a ranking in the class. And so, you know, you're compared to how your subset of papers overlaps with that ranking. So it's like a rank score. If you just give everybody high scores, you score very low accuracy, and you don't get a good grade. Yes. Is based on accuracy. That's the back evaluation grade. That's the helpfulness, yes. The review grade is based on the accuracy of your reviews. It's the same thing as what you just asked about.
The review
accuracy
grade overall, the umbrella of review grade is comprised of accuracy
right.
and helpfulness.
Yeah.
So what he brought you through was the accuracy, and then the helpfulness is a feedback component based off the back evaluations. Yes.
Yep. And it's everything, you can override anything. So if students have an issue with something, you can look at it and you can fix anything. And that's the thing that I communicate to them in person and on campus and in the videos in my eCampus class. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's way less. I don't have it quantified.
Technically, it's way less.
But that's it's more spread out. That's because the assignment is up and running and it's been honed. I mean, we've been revising these. You know, every time a student has an issue with something in the instructions or the rubric, we go and we look at it and is there a way we can improve this? And so we've been doing this for a few years now, and every time we do the assignment, it gets better, and then the assignment is there, so it gets easier every time. I think we're out of time, sorry. All right, thank you.
Thank you all.